tonight. My name is Leslie Fortoy, and I'm one of the many volunteers that run the chapter.
Yeah, Leslie! Yeah!
I feel kind of dumb because I'm trying to figure out how to run the lights, and I'm an engineer and I still don't know how to turn the lights off, so it's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, so we've got a great evening for you tonight. We've got Rob Siegel and Matt Kim from Get Set Games. They're going to share all their wonderful wisdom in shipping Mega Run. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a shout out to some of our sponsors of the chapter. We're really excited to have these sponsors. We've got Ubisoft Toronto, our gold sponsor, and the City of Toronto is our silver sponsor, and that's why we've got the cookies and the Orange Crush. I know John's really excited about the Orange Crush. Get Set Games is also a sponsor. We've also got Massive Damage, and two new sponsors. We've got Media's Law and Big Viking Games. They came in with a huge duffel bag, so I'm kind of excited what's in there. So let's get started, and have a great day.
Hey guys, I'm Matt Kuhn from Get Set Games, one of the co-founders, and this is Rob Siegel. I'm sure many of you guys know Rob, also one of the co-founders. There's 4 co-founders of Get Set Games actually, and 2 of us are representing this evening. So basically what we're going to talk about is the story of Mega Run, which is our most recent release. It came out in May. And Mega Run is the story of our company actually, in our studio. We founded the studio way back in 2009, but we didn't actually have a studio in 2009. So Mega Run really saw the opening of our studio and hiring of our first employees and the growth of the company as a real company during its extremely long development cycle. So we're going to be showing you some artwork, talking about some code strategies or whatever it is these people do with numbers and ones and zeros. And I'm an artist. And we'll talk a bit about the studio as well. Okay, so some of you may have played Mega Jump. How many of you guys have played Mega Jump here? Nice, thank you, appreciate it. So Mega Jump was our first title. I'm not going to talk about it much because it's about Mega Run, but we launched this way back in 2010, May 5th, 2010, as a paid app. And it was our first major title, and it hit really big. It went up to the top of the charts. In some charts, it was above Angry Birds for a while, which was really exciting when it was a paid app. And it did really well for a couple of weeks, and then it plummeted off the charts because we had no marketing budget. And the reason we had no money is because we were working out of my basement, and we were having our meetings, our company meetings in my basement, and we were doing all of our production at George Brown in the faculty staff room. How many of you guys are from George Brown? Anyone from George Brown here? Okay, so if any of you guys were there when I was teaching, you might have seen us producing games secretly in the corner of the staff room. So we created all of Mega Jump in the back corner of the George Brown staff room and released it. We then switched to a freemium model, which you guys, I guess, learned about last week, and that's when it really took off and went to #1 in the App Store. Proceeded to get millions of downloads, and what comes with downloads is revenue, and that was something that was quite surprising and exciting for us. So it was nice to have money and actually pay ourselves for the first time, and that's really when we felt like a company. So basically, we had this hit game on our hand. It went to #1 twice, actually, across the US, Canada, and over 34 other countries around the world. So what do you do to follow that up? We had 4 people. We had actually 3 people at that time because Rob had very little time available during that period to join in development. So we had two full-time employees, me and Derek. My brother was helping out a fair amount with graphics and sound, and Rob was doing what he could when he could get some time off work.
Yeah, I just joined full-time in September of 2010, yeah.
So a few months after Mega Jump had taken off and started to make some good money. So how do you follow that up with a very tiny team and a huge amount of work? As you know, on the App Store, you really, really have to maintain your apps and put out a lot of updates continuously to keep players engaged, keep them excited, and keep players coming back for more. So we were really swamped. We were trying to figure out what to do next. We realized that we had an IP in our hands here because this little red character had started to develop some love from a lot of our users. So we figured, well, what next? We'll make another Mega game. Mega Jump followed by Mega Run seems pretty obvious. This idea wasn't as obvious as it first seemed. We were kind of throwing around a lot of ideas and had a full page of sketches and concepts and ideas. And really what happened was I wanted to play a platformer on the iOS, on an iOS device, and there weren't any ones that I liked. I mean, there just wasn't anything that I wanted to play that was easy to play, that wasn't a straight port with a virtual D-pad and an A and B buttons. I wanted something that would be a platform game made for touch devices, for mobile. And so I drew that in Photoshop. Actually, I didn't draw it, just so it's been said. The only thing on here that's my artwork is the rabbit and those coins. It's totally stolen artwork, which is what you do when you just really want to put an idea together. If you spend a lot of time doing concept artwork, you know how long it can take. So when I was throwing together the idea, I just had an idea in my head and I wanted to sketch it out on paper. So it's kind of like doing a for positioning only kind of image swap if you've ever done graphic design. So I went and grabbed a whole bunch of images online, kind of got across the field I wanted, and then dumped some platforms on the top. And then grabbed one of our characters from Mega Jump and some coins. And I put it together in about 15 minutes. And I looked at that and said, yeah, I kind of want to play this game. This looks pretty dope. That was the 27th of July, 2010. So it was only 2 or 3 months after Mega Jump had come out and had started to become successful. And we were already starting to look at what we might do next. We thought we could get this out in about 5 weeks. Mega Jump was coded in 5 weeks. We actually had a fully playable, almost finished version of Mega Jump, the original game, in 5 weeks. We figured we might do the same. We'll just turn Mega Jump sideways, we'll throw some platforms in there, bam, done. Millions of dollars would be great. That didn't happen. So as you found out, the game came out this year. You can see there that this concept was done in 2010. So that was the beginning.
We could at this point play that first prototype, the prototype video, or do you want to?
We didn't even get there. Hold on, let's see what's next here. Okay. Yeah. Do you have the prototype, Rob?
Oh, I have.
So we're in the middle of another game production, so this was thrown together really quickly today, so it's not perfect. But Rob took some screen caps of. Rob took some video screen caps of the game in development in its very first early stages, which you might find interesting. So this is the first version of Mega Run in code. Yeah.
Wait for it.
Here we go.
This game awesome.
So as an artist, you can imagine, Rob says, hey, I got something to show you. You should see this. I think it's going to be good.
This was groundbreaking at the time. It was awesome just to see something else after having worked on Mega Jump for so long.
So this is Mega Jump's background turned sideways. It literally is.
Yeah, that's Oh, that's okay.
What's the next one?
The next video?
Yeah. Are you playing that one? Or should
We're going to find out.
Okay. All right, let's go back to the slide.
Bless you.
We have 2 hours for this, right?
Just on the screen, so it's just sort of low.
Sorry?
Lift the image up a little, is that possible?
Great question. If you can reach up there and tilt that thing.
It's okay, I'll-
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, we gotta move faster. Okay. So Rob created that demo, which was amazing, sort of. And so basically the next step is design. What the hell is this game going to be? We literally started this game from an image. I don't recommend you do that. An image should give you an idea and a feel of what you're going to be making, but you should also design something, put some ideas down, jot down some ideas in a design document, some your GDD, and really get an idea of what the game's about, what your strategy is. There's a whole lot of things you can really talk about. I'm sure if any of you guys have done any game design work, you'll know that you don't just start coding with a single picture. That's what we did. I don't know why. Maybe because we were kind of all working 2 jobs at the time and not thinking too much about it. But we actually did start to do some development. Once we had a running prototype, we started to create some images. So these are some concepts that my brother put together about the kind of enemies we might have, even the control scheme. At the time, we actually had multiple control schemes for the character. You could run along, obviously, and that would be an auto runner, but you could also jump. You could double jump, and that would actually put you higher up in the air, but then you could also then triple jump, and that would push you down, so you could basically do a burst attack on top of an enemy's head. And we also had the idea of a dash as well. You see a dash in a lot of running games where you can dash forward, I guess like Robot Unicorn Attack has a really great dash feature. And so we thought, hey, let's steal that great concept and put it in our game. Turns out it didn't work. It's interesting, just the way that our game was put together and the way that our levels were set up. The dash didn't work, but it was in for several months. The other thing we wanted to do was create the levels parametrically. Basically, we had no level design. We had level segments that would be put together in code. And Rob's going to talk about that in a second. But what you can see on the left is how we imagined that we'd actually build the platforms differently depending on the speed the player was running. So as the player ran faster, we'd actually make the platforms longer by using different kinds of platform segments so that it would be more of a roller coaster. If you're running slowly, there'd be smaller segments to jump on. As you got faster by picking up special power-ups and coins and things like that, we'd actually build out and have a longer platform. And we got it working. I mean, Rob actually had it so that we had a game that would build the levels and build all the stages and platforms as you played it. And it turned out they sucked. The amount of logic that we needed to make something fun and exciting was just too much. I mean, it wasn't Rob's fault. Again, it came back to design. Is that all we could make were just long platforms that you could run along into coins to pick up and randomly generated enemies. But this didn't provide enough gameplay or enough interest. Although we did take that version to GDC and show everyone because we thought it was amazing at the time once we got it working. So it was so exciting to have some tech working and some graphic scrolling, and we actually started to show it to people at GDC and say, hey, look at our great game. We've got some work to do. We also looked at, did a lot of research, or at least in this one slide you can see, trying to figure out how big the character should be on screen. We had no idea. I mean, we had a certain character size in Mega Jump, but that definitely didn't translate exactly into Mega Run. So we actually had to figure out how big should the character be. We looked at classic characters compared to the screen size, Mario, Sonic, Cannonball, and other classic platform and running games, and try to figure out how do they fit on screen, how does it look on the small screen size. It's such an important part when you're designing for mobiles. How does it look when it's on a tiny little screen? You know, the artists at our company work on big 30-inch monitors, and everything looks beautiful and everything looks huge, but then you shrink it down onto a tiny phone, you can't see anything. So that took a fair amount of work to figure out, so that's what that image shows there. Rob? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you want to start this one, or you want me to?
I'll quickly mention what this is, and then you talk about the tech. So this is what the first platforms look like. In fact, what you looked at just there, that video you saw, was actually a very advanced prototype. Originally, the platforms just looked like that. They were just gray blocks. You can see basically that they formed out of pieces. We have flat pieces, we have curves, and then we have angled pieces to go up and down. This is an example of the kind of art iteration that we were doing while we were developing the game. Obviously, although we started out with sort of a high-res image that looked nice, you don't want to start producing actual art, high-end art, to test stuff, and certainly you don't want programmers creating art either. So what we did was put together some very basic stuff and sort of iterated with what the platforms looked like while we were creating the game. So you can see basically some of the steps that we went through trying to decide how the game should look, what the art style should be, how it should be painted, until we've arrived obviously at the final design, which has that sort of more polished look and is a bit more accessible and easier to read on the smaller screen sizes. So Rob, you want to talk about your platform creation?
Yeah, so we've got, as we're developing the platform systems, I guess that's a pretty good screenshot. You saw from the previous one that Matt had set up, a lot of the platforms were just one solid piece, which worked great for a prototype, but once we're getting into optimizations and good use of memory, having big textures like that really was not very efficient. So we ended up with the system, which is like in the second screenshot, you can see it broken up as opposed to the completed one at the top. And the bottom one has different sections. So basically for each platform we had a beginning point of either there would be sloped or flat, and then the end point would be sloped or flat again to varying degrees. So the beginning would have, say, like 3 different slopes up and down, and the end would be similarly for the end caps. And then we came up with an algorithm procedurally initially to just plug them together. And it generally worked pretty good, and you can see it in the game. Most of the platforms look like, actually if you go back to the previous slide for a second. But yeah, most of the platforms are, look, there's no gaps in between each of the segments, so we did have some issues in there initially where we put them together, just like very fine pixel separations between each of the segments, but luckily we were able to resolve those. And then another optimization we did, you can see the decorations that are broken apart, the bushes and the mushrooms are added in after the platforms are generated. So each of those are like a separate drawing pass to do the platforms, and then the accents and decorations on top of that. So I guess we can jump to the next slide. So this is a few more of the decorations and ways that we broke apart platforms and different objects in the game. So in the top left, right in the top left, you can see break blocks, which we added in actually a bit later in the project, as well as the moving blocks, which is the one big gray one that looks angry in the middle, and spike blocks on the end. So those were added actually a bit later, and Jab Adams, who's in the back, did a bunch of great work for moving blocks and break blocks and collision systems to make sure everything works correctly. And we'll talk a bit more about the collision system later on, but it was very tricky. In some ways, it doesn't always work in many edge cases. But just a couple of other platform types you can see on there. We had moving blocks, or moving platforms, falling platforms, and getting all those to work correctly and optimize in drawing and performance was a fair bit of a challenge. And then at the end you can see parallax elements at the bottom, and we spent a fair amount of time doing that. We knew we wanted to have parallax in the game, but it was a fair amount of challenge once we started adding in camera zooming, and as the player moves up and down, how do you get the camera to track the player correctly and follow the curves, and so that it doesn't make you throw up as you're like moving up and down, and how do you predict where the player is going to go on the platform. We went through lots of different iterations of that. We just tried a certain version of it and be like, it looks like garbage. As much as hard work it was to get versions of these cameras working, it was we had to move on to different versions to make it look and feel the way we wanted.
So it's worth mentioning as well that everything you're seeing on screen is what creates an entire world in Megarun. So although these worlds are really lush and you can run it endlessly, the entire world is built out of just these segments. There's a sky background, there's a front platform pieces that can be created into an almost infinite array of different platform shapes and lengths and sizes. And then we've got the different decorational aspects like the parallax layers. By the way, parallax layers, if you don't happen to know, is basically moving different layers at different speeds to give the effect of depth. Things that are further away move slower, things that are closer to the player or to the camera move faster. So we had to do multi-directional parallax as well. As the player moves up and down, they've got actually quite a wide range of height that they can move, so we needed to move the parallax layers both vertically and also horizontally. And also we had to change what happened when the camera zoomed in and out. The faster the player runs, we wanted to let the player see more of the screen so they could see what's going to be happening in front of them, because as they move faster you need to have more time to basically see what's coming so that you can react to it. And so that actually also affects the way the parallax works. So Rob and Nick had to work for a long time to figure out how to do that. It sounds really simple, but there's a lot of brain twisting stuff with parallax layers going off in different directions, big gaps appearing. And like you said, we had one version that made you feel seasick. I don't exactly know how that happened, but it was pretty gross. And then we've got all the decorational elements as well that are randomly applied to all the platforms. So although the platforms can look any kind of shape and size, we also have these large selection decorative items that are applied to those platforms randomly, so that each one looks very different because it's got different flowers and different mushrooms and things thrown on it at the same time. Do you have another video that you want to show?
Yeah, I can jump to now. Yes, this has got a bunch of the camera movement and parallax elements in there. Those are just initial versions.
So this one's actually still using,
Yes, that's my job.
so the camera at this point actually followed the platforms, not the player. I don't know what logic that was, but it seemed interesting at the time. And also that the platforms will still be generated automatically. There's no level design going on there. Speaking of level design. So after we figured out that getting our levels to be generated parametrically was really boring actually. It wasn't, we didn't have enough control, and we would have had to put in a lot of different logic in there to change how the levels were created to provide differentiation, to provide gameplay, and to be able to control everything we wanted to control for the player experience. So we decided to start designing levels, go figure. But these are all the things that you have to decide when you have a very small group of people. Again, we only had 4 people, and not all of us were full-time at this point. I was still teaching at George Brown. My brother was doing a lot of freelance work, and we didn't have a ton of time to actually sit down and do level design, which is why we wanted to be generated automatically. A lot of the design decisions were based on the size of our team and how quickly we thought we might be able to get this game out. However, the game just wasn't good enough. And so it was at this point that we had actually generated enough revenue from MegaJump to open a studio. We actually managed to get a space downtown, move out of the room closet at George Brown. Actually, it was a really nice studio. They gave us dual monitors and really high-end Mac Pros, but it was nice to have our own space. So we moved out of there, and we actually brought on an extra former student of mine, Mike Sandercock, to help out with a bunch of artwork. He was a peer tutor. He's one of the best students I had because he was so driven. And so we really needed an extra person, so we brought him on. So that was the first time we actually hired someone, and he was just an intern at the time, but man, he got a lot of work to do. And part of that was helping us with the level design. So at that point, we grew to 5 people, and we actually opened up a real studio that we could go to work in. I stopped teaching at George Brown. My brother Nick stopped freelancing. We actually had salaries, which was great. So at this point, we decided to create our own levels. We put the levels together in Photoshop. We turned Photoshop into our level design tool. Basically, we needed a tool for layout that we could place all the objects in the level, tweak it, and then spit out a file that we could then run in the game. So we wrote a very small exporter, JSON exporter in Photoshop using Photoshop scripting that we could basically just lay out pieces like this, bits of platform, enemies, coin positions, and patterns, and then export that out as a small text file, which could then be read in by the game, and it would then appear in the game. And this drastically, suddenly changed everything about the game, because now we could control every last position down to the pixel of what the player would experience. But we still maintained an element of this randomness in that we didn't export an entire level. You wouldn't start at the beginning and design the entire level. We exported chunks of levels so that they could be then combined in random ways, so that every time you played through a level, the chunks would be put together in different ways, and Rob created code that would basically line up those chunks so that the end platform of a chunk would line up with the beginning platform of the next chunk of a platform. And we're able to build out hundreds of these little chunks of gameplay with little exciting things that would happen, and put them together in a random set, and then let you play through it as a level.
I guess, yeah, just to add to that slide that's there, you can see kind of the outlines of the segments that are on there as one of the Photoshop files that Matt and Nick would have been, and then later Mike would have been working with. You can see some of the enemies, some of the placement we did in code, like the blue guy in the middle of the screen who's kind of hovering over the platform. He actually gets tacked onto the platform at runtime when the game starts up, because obviously there's no concrete way for the artist to be like, hey, can you be on this platform, but we cannot put the way in code to do that. So we can go jump to the next one.
Okay, so once we've got the general game working, we had basically a pre-production design, which you've been looking at up till now, which is basic look and feel for the game. And that would have been fine, but again, we started to think, we've got extra people now, we've got time. MegaJump continues to do well and provides enough to keep the studio open. So we figured, let's go for more themes and more styles. So These are examples for the artists out there. Basically what we did was recreate all of those assets that you saw previously, but redraw them in a different style. So we recreate the sky, recreate the blocks, recreate the different platform pieces. They were identically the same size, pixel for pixel, but obviously had a very different theme. And so all of these worlds use a completely different set of sprites, but they're all exactly the same size, and they literally can be swapped in one set of sprites for the other. So there was no real code change that needed to happen. We had all the same exports coming out of Photoshop that are just saying this shape of platform, whether it's an angled piece, an end piece, or a down slope, or a flat piece. And it didn't care what it looked like. That would be read in at a separate point. So we'd say this is the layout and the positions of all the objects. Which batch of sprites should I use? Because all the sprites were all the same size. And that allowed us to basically chop and change levels and then plug them into whichever world we wanted to have. Which allowed us to create, as you can see, quite a big variation in all the worlds. There's now 5 worlds in the game, more on the way, that all look quite drastically different, but all use the exact same set of sprites to define them. Okay.
I got nothing for this one. All right, so yeah. So this is my slide, so I'll talk more in detail about this. So as we were developing through on things, it became very tedious to if you're installing the game fresh, how do we test like World 2 Stage 1 without actually playing through all of, say, World 1, which we have the natural progression. You would finish a stage and move on to, or finish a world and then move on to the next world once you finish the 16 stages, which is just not realistic for testing. So we came up with this mini developer dashboard, which was you tap in the top left of the screen, which will not happen for you in production builds. So you guys will not be able to access that. Of course, the code doesn't even make it into those builds, so tough luck there. But in there, you can, for testing, you can control various aspects of the game. Property area or editor for tweaking various aspects of the player, how fast they're running, which there's some problems there, but it worked in some cases, at least for us, and that was the idea. Turn on and off FPS, logging. But the stage select was really the biggest one, to be able to test out different stages arbitrarily instead of having to play through the game. So that was a big advantage for designers and artists, just to go in and be like, hey, what's the World 1 Stage 8 going to be like?
The biggest part was to be able to use that Dropbox button up there.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Well, I'm going to get to that. So adding in Dropbox, which of course we were using already in our teams to sync files between our computers, various art assets, mainly in marketing materials. And we looked at using that as a driver for testing out various stages, so that Matt, Nick, and Mike could go off and be like, test out, create a new pattern, or a new world on their desktop and be able to try it out in game without.
Let me quickly describe how it was before this. We would have to design all the levels, export them all in Photoshop, which would spit out a bunch of scripts. We would then have to give them to the coders, who would then have to create a whole new build of the game. We'd then have to get our phones, install that build, and that would be the first time we'd actually play the levels that we designed. So you can imagine how slow it is to iterate with that kind of thing, which, as if there's any level designers out there, you don't want to have to wait 2 hours or even a day sometimes before you can actually play the level that you've just been designing. So we had to deal with that, and that's what the whole Dropbox concept there. So we actually got the app to download directly from Dropbox using the Dropbox API, so we could just dump files right into Dropbox as they were exported. In fact, the exporter would put them in the correct folder, and then all we'd have to do is hit the download button. They would instantly download those new files, and we'd be playing them within seconds as opposed to waiting for new builds. So that allowed us to iterate constantly on the level design, so we could really try out a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so that was definitely a big step up over what we had previously. So some other aspects to the developer dashboard here is, and we'll have some screenshots of it in a second, but being able to view collisions. Again, this is something that Java added in, so that we could actually see how the player was colliding with things, and that became a big issue later on to get to various edge cases of you'd hit a block or bounce off of a block and collide into like another enemy or another block, and does the behavior look correct when that happens? So it was great for debugging those cases. And of course, as well, we could give ourselves arbitrarily amounts of money just to purchase stuff in the store. So that's in the bottom right is a screenshot, kind of what you get with the heads-up display. If you turn that on in the game, it shows you the player's position, how fast they're going. It's probably too small for you guys to see, but it says staging pattern off to the right in the shaded area. And that would let designers see like what stage they're currently testing on, which pattern, which as Matt was explaining earlier, they designed in Photoshop.
Because the patterns are randomized during the game, you actually sometimes wouldn't know which pattern you're playing, so it'd be hard to tell when you're debugging and finding problems. You know, maybe an enemy is floating midair or something like that. It's like, where is that happening? That'd be hard to tell, so we actually had to implement that feature just to know where we were in the game.
Yeah. So that was a great advantage as well. So that's good for this slide.
One last thing, it's actually quite important. In the bottom right corner, you can see plus 100 MP and plus 1,000 coins. If you guys are doing any mobile development, and especially in the freemium space, you'll know how important the store is. The store and our ability to sell in-app purchases is a massively important part of our design criteria. Basically, it's the only way we can make money. The game is a freemium game, so being able to tweak the store, to be able to unlock things, to debug stuff in the store, to be able to buy items, and test the store functionality and make sure that whatever the player buys in the store then gets into the game and works correctly is essential. So that became a really important part for us to be able to debug all the aspects of the store and what was happening in the game. Because also for gameplay, what you buy in the store is power-ups, and that really can fundamentally change the way the levels work. So artists really need to be able to have complete control over the store and what objects they currently had unlocked to be able to test different parts of the game. So having those 2 coins in there was essential, or those 2 buttons to get coins.
And that was actually a big problem too. Before we had those buttons in, we were using OpenFaint for our user management. We'd have to go into the OpenFaint web dashboard and modify the user's account, basically like award them currency, and then go back to the game and log in with that user account. So it was a bit of an awkward process to actually give the user money to be able to test stuff out.
You only discover this stuff when you're there. You don't. It seems obvious right now, but like, again, we built this game from a screenshot, so it's kind of like, man, it's really hard to get coins. We should probably do something about that. We don't realize that for like days or weeks. I'm like, maybe we could do something that's easier.
I'd actually come up with the method eventually for testing. If you'd have an object like a break block or something to test it out, you'd be like, when am I going to encounter this in the stage? And you play through half the stage and you wouldn't see it. So I eventually got into the habit of actually like changing coins, which happened like everywhere to the object that I wanted. So that became like an easy way just to test like a break block or a star or whatever. So this is a screenshot just of what you would see from that developer dashboard turning on collisions. There's basically outlines around various aspects. I'm not going to try to explain it, but you can ask Jabba later because he's sitting in the back about what each color means for the collision space. But maybe if someone's interested in that in the question and answer period, we can get into that. But this was really great for visualizing just the collision aspects and bounds for various objects in the game. So you can see the outline on top of the platforms so that we know that the player should actually run on that space. So if there was no line there, it would be like, okay, that's why the player is falling through the platform there. Or around the coins again, so that we know that the player will collide with those things when they get close to it. So I want to highlight just this quickly. We added this in later on. This is a snapshot of the dashboard for a tool we're using called Criticism, which provides you online crash reports for iOS and Android and I think a few other platforms. But this is just one of the views that you can get. These are crash trends for all the versions of our games. So the graphs that have multi-line are actually various versions of Mega Run, so it gives us a good profile. How many people are playing a particular version, how fast do they upgrade to that version, which is really great for debugging and getting a sense of how people are playing your game, how often they're playing it. The graph in the top left is the daily active users, so you can see kind of like those bumps, which we see most people play on Sundays. I think in the middle of the week is the least amount of players. So lining up all that data is really invaluable just to keeping your game crashing as little as possible.
What I didn't mention as well is at this point we're now into like 2011. at the end of 2011. So we've been a whole year basically working on Mega Run as well as supporting Mega Jump and adding a lot of new features. And it was at that point that we realized that we're just swamped with updating Mega Jump and trying to get Mega Run out the door. At this point, we would have been well over a year developing this game. It wasn't the whole team. I mean, it was mostly Rob just working away with some help from the artist. But then we realized we need to get this game out soon. We were kind of trying to get it out in 2011, which is, didn't happen at all. Which is when we started to think about hiring more people. So we brought on Mike full time, brought in Andy Smith. Some of you may know Andy Smith. And made a great mistake in hiring that guy as our producer, but he's great at what he does, and he's good at drinking too. So he helped us manage what we were doing, having one game out there that needed a lot of updates, having a second game that was now entering into full team production. So getting all 6 guys working on the new game while updating the old game, and everything else involved in running a company and dealing with business. So we brought on Java at that point to help out, speed up the development of Mega Run, try and get it out at a reasonable time frame, which still didn't happen, but it was greatly improved. For example, it was Java who implemented that Dropbox implementation. And so that meant we went a whole year without having that access to Dropbox to download the level design stuff. So that really helped.
Yeah, we really tended to make it harder on ourselves, I think.
Okay, so this is a bit more about some of the artwork. Over the time that we worked on this project, as you can imagine, as you saw from the first video and the more recent videos, and if you've played the game, you notice that there's a significant change in the art style. We work iteratively, as I'm sure every studio does. It's rare that the first artwork that you produce is the best artwork. In fact, it's almost never. So you can see here, our first game, Mega Jump, the character faces the player the whole time. So your character is facing forward, which is great. And he's a 3D model that I had created in 3ds Max, and he looked great facing the camera. But as soon as we turned him sideways, he looked really stupid. And so this is the model for Mega Jump turned sideways and his mouth open because he's excited to be running all the time. And it looked terrible. And so this is something that's unexpected, but something that you have to iterate on. Everything we did, like the platforms you saw earlier, we had to work through it. What do we think it should look like? Try something quickly, that's not working, and keep iterating until you end up with something that's not embarrassing to show to your friends. This was the first iteration, was on the title screen. We thought maybe that's kind of okay, and we realized no, it's actually not. You should see the first iteration from Mega Jump, actually, of this character. I should have put it on there. It's hilarious. His eyes are pointing in different directions. So a lot of time, a lot of work, and we end up with the final version that you see in the game, which is set up specifically to look good running sideways. It sounds simple, but it took a lot of work. Same again. So this character over here was created for a game jam. It was created for, I think it was the
Global Game Jam.
Global Game Jam. So we were modeling a whole bunch of players and characters, enemies and bad guys for the Global Game Jam. So it's a two-day event, so we did a lot of modeling. In fact, Redford, that main character, came out of that. He was actually a bad guy, he was a monster in that game, and ended up being repurposed for Mega Jump and is now kind of our company mascot. But he was created in a weekend. So was this guy, you can tell. Terrible. And he's got no arms. So in the first versions of the game, he was actually running in it. He was our bad guy, and he was running along. And after a while, you're like, man, this looks terrible. And so find some time. So again, it's all iterative. We ended up going through a whole series. For example, here you can see over here a bunch of iterations for the purple guy. The one nearest Redford there is the one we ended up putting in the game. But you go through a whole series of iterations, trying, failing, putting them in the game, and things not looking right, testing the animation. And that goes for all of the characters up there. So that's an example of the kind of iterations we were doing. In the bottom right-hand corner, are a whole bunch of iterations just for one enemy in the game. In fact, none of these guys in the bottom right corner are in the game. They all got thrown out. But they were all just being tested, and they just didn't look right for the game. So the final version isn't even on that screen. But there's a fair amount of work that goes into producing that final game asset. And the same for the UI. We'll get to the UI in a second, but we had to do a lot of work trying to get a really juicy feel to all the UI, because this is for the store. This is what people are actually buying. They're buying the stuff in your store. So it really needs to look nice and make it look like something they want to spend some money on. Okay, so UI was a big problem. In fact, it was the worst and continues to be a huge problem. UI is the bane of our company's existence. I don't know how many of you guys do UI, but it sucks. This is terrible. But it was mocked up really quickly just to get in the game for one of the demos. In fact, none of this worked when we first put in the game. This is actually just a JPEG that we inserted into the first demos of the game, so it kind of looked like something. And then if you touch the screen, it would start the demo. But again, it's using that awful thing. And this is in the days when we still thought this was literally just Mega Jump turned sideways. So we actually made the same screenshot. We just took Redford, put fireballs behind him, which is what it looks like in Mega Jumps. Just literally turned it sideways, took the logo, took everything from Mega Jump and put it in the new game. And we learned that was a bad idea. Mega Jump was made in 2010, and we were gearing up to launch a game in 2012. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but in 2 years the App Store changed dramatically. Back in 2010, the free app charts were really charts for hobbyists, for free demos, for kind of homemade stuff that was easy to compete with. So as long as your stuff didn't look terrible, you'd get some pretty good feedback from it. Can you imagine if Doodle Jump came out these days as a paid app? How many people, if Doodle Jump came out this year, how many people would pay $1 for Doodle Jump? It seems obvious now, like, yeah, of course, but really, there's tons of games that look way better than Doodle Jump, that play better, that don't get any attention on the App Store because it's so competitive now. But back when it came out, 2009, 2010, as long as your game was pretty good, it was very easy to get into the charts. We figured, well, we'll just take all the UI from Mega Jump and we'll just dump it again, turn the screen sideways. It was horrific. So you can see the stage clear, the store, the game over, and stage select. And we didn't just take over the UI, but we took over some of the paradigms that we had in Mega Jump. In Mega Jump, we decided we wanted, because it was an arcade game, because it's an endless jumper, we wanted as little UI as possible. Now that doesn't look like little UI. The idea was just a few screens of UI. When you started the game, when you had a game over, when you finished the stage, it would be the least amount of interruptions. So we try to put everything on a single screen. You can see that's really a bad idea, especially when you have high score leaderboards. You want to have some store elements. You want to have OpenFaint tied in, all kinds of options to access other parts of the game. When you try to present a whole ton of information and you put it all on one screen and then you put it on a tiny iPhone, it really doesn't work out too well. So we had a fair amount of learning to do, and these were all in the game and working, and it just looked awful. And the game was looking really pretty, and then you'd end up on a game over screen or stage clear, and instead of feeling excited that you got stage clear, it's kind of like womp womp. You presented with this ugly mess. So we had to really turn things around. You can see stage select was a disaster because you could actually select the world and the stage on the same screen. So rather than having kind of like the Angry Birds style, where you select the world first, then you select the stage, we try to pile it all into one screen. Disaster.
Which luckily I don't think we ever prototyped that version in code. Because it would have been a nightmare.
The other thing we're doing as well is that we hadn't figured out how to do swipe at this point. So all of our UI in Mega Jump was all using buttons. We didn't swipe through any of the items in the store. So that was another thing that Java did when he joined the team, was actually take the time. We just didn't have the time to get swipe implemented on a freaking touchscreen phone. So this was all button-based for a long time, and then we started to think about actually using swipe. So we simplified everything, make everything as clear as possible. We've got the new art style, we've got finalized logos, we've got a whole new UI scheme that we've come out with where everything looks just tasty. We wanted everything to look really juicy and colorful. We all grew up playing 16-bit Nintendo, and so we just wanted to have that feel, the Mario-esque feel of just bright, colorful, and easy on the eyes, and something that was really easy to read on a small screen. So this is what we came up with instead. It's not perfect by any means, but it's a significant improvement over what we had before. And this took a huge amount of time. One, because you suddenly have an explosion of the number of different UI screens. Once you start taking different elements of the UI out of the single page, you have to produce multiple pages, and each one of those pages has to be coded, and all of the movements and everything else has to be scripted. So we're not using Flash or anything, so Rob can talk about it in a second, but the amount of coding work that goes into building these UI screens. At first, all of the button positions and everything else was hand-coded, like hard-coded positions, like pixel positions for every button on screen, which isn't nice if you're trying to support multiple screen sizes. So that was a big mistake that we started out with, and we worked around that. But basically, we wanted everything to be easier, more breezy, more colorful, no black backgrounds, which is just like deadening to the soul, and just make everything as bright and colorful as possible.
So there's a few things I wanted to mention in this slide, and as Matt mentioned initially, all the positions of everything that you would see in UI were hard-coded. And they would make it just a real nightmare even if you wanted to tweak the position. Nick would come to me and I'd be like, I think the alignment on like the justification on this text is like 2 pixels off, and I'd be like, okay, I gotta put in like the number change and then like rebuild it and start up the game and then get to that point in the game. We still don't have, and we didn't have at the time, a quick way to test these UIs out. What they look like in game would be you play through, and once you got to that point in the game and see the screen, that was how you tested it. And unfortunately, that's still the case. We don't have a great way to be like, what does the in-game UI look like? But once again, Java saved us because he put together an exporter for, again, in Photoshop of UI. The artist could put together UI in Photoshop, and then it would export it to JSON files, and then we'd read that in the game, and we could get the positions from what they exported from Photoshop in the game. And that was just a huge advantage at its basic level for the positioning, so we could place text and sprites and everything where they wanted in Photoshop, and we could just start that up in the game and it would be placed there. Now there is still a lot of deficiencies which we're still struggling with. For example, for you guys who have played it, you can see the start positions there. That stuff still has to be hand-coded, functionality around it. So we can't do, say, scripting or animation on the art design side. I had spent a huge amount of time actually doing this whole sequence. When you get to the end of the stage, you can get experience points and get like awarded the stars, and the stars fill up. That all had to be hand-coded, and probably took me a couple weeks. And I don't recall exactly how many, but it'd probably be close to a month to make sure that the experience bar fills up and the stops and plays like a particle effect, and all these little fancy additions. That's kind of the next step of where we want to take things, improving upon this tool. So that's it.
Just wanted to quickly mention, by the way, about Doodle Jump. I feel bad because actually the guy who made it, Igor, is actually a good friend of mine. So sorry if you're watching this, Igor. I love the game. It is a fantastic game. Just first thing that came to mind is a game that's not like uber graphical, but they pulled off so much because of the gameplay. And it's actually interesting how many Doodle games are still doing really, really well and killing our games as well. So that's potentially a bad example, but I think the important part was to say that we can't get away with doing what we did before, which is why we had to take it up a notch.
Sounds good to me.
Next one.
Next one.
Okay. So finally, after a year and 10 months of development and a whole bunch of stuff going on and bringing in, we were then at 7 people and running a studio and paying our bills, we finally get to launch another game. So almost 2 years between launching games. I don't recommend it. One of the things that was difficult was, one, working on the same damn thing for 2 years, which if you do AAA, it's not really a big deal, I guess, but that's why we love mobile, is you get much quicker dev cycles. But the other thing is that literally the market changed. We were entering in a totally different marketplace than the one that we had launched MegaJump in. And from 2010 to 2012, the middle of 2012, it's a completely different place. So much of the design, obviously, is how are you going to monetize? How are you going to make money? How are you going to sell this thing? How are you going to get it into the charts? And we were still flip-flopping right in 2012 about, is it going to be a paid app? Is it going to be freemium? We're going to do both, maybe have it paid for a while and then switch it free. Is our pricing right? Is our marketing right? How are we going to get this game noticed by people when we're in such a big competitive field? And that's something that was really a little bit scary. So we did a lot for the launch. The biggest thing was having friends. That was seriously it. We didn't spend any money on the launch, which is kind of silly these days, but we managed to get away with it. We didn't spend a single penny on the launch, except for the launch party, which we spent a lot of money on, booze specifically. But we had friends. We had friends in other development companies. We had companies that we met, other company owners, other designers, developers that had great games out in the market who were willing to help us with the launch. And so we were able to do cross-promotion, cross-marketing with them. Again, it really helped that we had MegaJump out there. And we've been trading basically ads with them through MegaJump. MegaJump had millions of users. We could show an ad for our friends and partners, and they agreed to show ads for Megarun when it launched. One of the people that helped us launch was Temple Run, which really helped. I don't know if you've seen that game, but yeah, at its peak had something like 30 million active users, something ridiculous like that. I could be wrong, but it was huge. And basically they had the ability, just by advertising in their game, to drive any game into the top 25 if they advertised them. And we were lucky enough to bend their ear and ask them to agree to cross-promote us when we launched. And that was along with a lot of other really helpful and fantastic partners that we worked with. So that worked great for us when we launched. Finally, on the 30th of May, it boosted up the charts. And by the Friday, that was Thursday, I believe, by the Friday, we'd hit #1, which is a really happy feeling. It also helps that Apple got behind it. So in Canada, Apple made us their Game of the Week when we launched. So we became the Game of the Week in Canada, and you get that huge banner on the App Store. Many of the app stores around the world, they're all different. If you get Game of the Week in Canada, it doesn't mean you'll get Game of the Week anywhere else, and we didn't. I guess they like the fact that we were Canadian, but in many other countries, including the US, which is obviously 50% of the market or more, they did put a featured banner for us as well. And that really helped a huge amount to drive more users and get that kind of organic downloads by being high up in the chart. So we hit #1 in 24 countries, both on the iPad and the iPhone. And when you're #1, the visibility is huge, so you can really drive a ton of downloads. You don't have to spend any money, which is nice. When Temple Run got to #1, they stayed there for about 4 weeks, which is amazing. We stayed there for about 6 or 7 days. But couldn't complain. It was just an incredible feeling to be the #1 of anything. It's a great feeling to have. And so, obviously, big downloads means revenue, which means that we spent a long time on this game, but it's paying off. It's a game that we're proud of. It's a game that a lot of people get to play. And we get a lot of really wonderful feedback from all the players who tell us how much they like it. So that's a really good feeling, and obviously keeps us wanting to make more games and make games that are the same quality and hopefully better. Anything else, Ron? So that's it. I'm Matt. This is Rob. And if you have any questions, there's our contact info. I should have put it at the top. Java mentioned if there's any important information, put it at the top of the slide because no one can see it at the bottom. I ignored it totally. You're wrong, Java.
I read that somewhere online.
Yeah. He's totally right. So if you can't see it, it's at the bottom.
Pretty easy emails.
Yeah.
Rob@getsetgames.com, Matt@getsetgames.com. So I guess we're on to the questions, really, if there are any.
In the back.
Yeah.
No microphone here.
Go ahead, hold it.
No.
Oh.
Rob, you'll have to get tight with me up here.
Hi.
Long time no see.
So when I played Mega Run, one of my biggest bugs I've had was when the camera just like panned vertically off screen and went black. What would you say was the biggest problem that you had, and how did you overcome that?
In terms of bugs,
Yeah.
it's the biggest bug, Rob.
The iPad one was pretty awkward.
So
So right when we were about to ship, we wanted to support some of the lower end devices, so like iPad 1 and iPhone 3GS. So they have some pretty limited resources, at least in terms of iPhone hardware. So we had real problems with the iPad 1. It would like play through like one stage and then just like crash right away. And we couldn't figure out like what was going on. We knew it was using a lot of memory and that there was memory issues, but we couldn't figure it out. And luckily, kind of closer to release, we started profiling with it.
But this is the day of release.
Yeah, it's like
sending it to Apple.
Yeah. So we really wanted to have it. So you know, like what are we going to do? We just kept looking at it and found it was because of an issue with Cocos 2D, which is the graphics engine we're using. Kind of an inconsistency. What had happened was Nick, who was doing all of our particle effects, he would export a particle effect to an XML file, which we would read in the game, and there was a field in that XML which said like number of particles. And the way that Cocos creates the particle effects is it creates a static chunk of memory for all the particles. So we had like huge numbers of particle effects, and for a bunch of them there was like 5,000 particles. So needless to say, that was consuming a huge amount of memory. And once we found that, it played much better on the first iPad.
It's like creating 5,000 sprites and putting them all in memory at the same time for each particle effect of every block you're breaking.
Yeah. So it was kind of actually, I mean, it's not like we knew that was the problem. It was just that we knew there was problems with memory and started profiling that more, and it eventually came up. Actually, Apple has some pretty good tools that come along with Xcode, which is the development environment, for seeing how much memory you're consuming or your third-party libraries are consuming. So once we kind of got onto that tangent, we're like, oh, okay, this is why it's happening. So it became obvious, but initially I think we were kind of burned out because it seemed obvious that we should profile to find out such a thing, but we didn't think of it initially.
My favorite bug, just real quick, was one that we didn't solve till right near the end, where the main character, if you hit an enemy with just the right power up, just the right angle, would actually shoot up into the air infinitely. Yeah? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. And eventually the sky.
Oh, that's the one you're talking about. Okay, yeah. Did we fix that?
So I actually have a screenshot of that still recently.
Oh,
It's gotten better, but I don't think it's
questions?
Do you have some questions?
Oh yeah, you emailed it, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I was wondering, how do you guys handle the iPhone and the Android development? I know that the first game is on the Android, the second one is not, but how do you guys handle that?
Great question. We did a Mega Jump port externally. So it was a full port rewrite of all the code for Mega Jump. It's now on its third external company working on the port for Mega Jump. So working with external companies is exciting and fun. You never know what they're going to do, and which is why we're on our third company now, who are actually awesome, and they're in Ecuador. So they're doing well, but the porting process externally, again, we're such a small company and we don't have Android expertise at our company, so that's why we did it externally, and why it took a long time. And the first version that went out was frankly embarrassing. Had so many bugs, it was so bad that they got a ton of one-star reviews, didn't support a lot of devices. And now it's doing almost as well as the iPhone version, which is really great to see. What we're doing for Mega Run and why it's taking so long is we're actually using a different method, which is basically cross-compiling, where we can recompile the Objective-C code, the actual code from the iPhone version and Cocos 2D for iPhone, and just recompile it. These guys have written their own compilers that will compile it to run natively on Android. So you can actually get an iPhone game running on an Android screen in about 3 or 4 days. We've seen it. And then you have to take out various Apple-specific SDKs and anything else that you're using that is Apple-specific and replace it with the Android ones to make it work. So we were planning to do that for Mega Run. Again, working externally with a company in the UK. Negotiations there kind of broke down, so we had to start over, and now we're in the middle of getting it recompiled with a company in San Francisco. So it'll be up before Christmas on Amazon and on Google Play.
Hey guys.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about the revenue model and how you guys actually make money with this kind of stuff? It might be interesting to talk about that.
Just winging it. Andy was here, he'd make it sound like he knows what he's doing. We learned a lot by trial and error in Mega Jump. So that game was out by, for pretty much 2 years by the time Mega Run came out. So we learned a lot, we got a lot of data. We tried a lot of things with gut feel. We collect a ton of analytics and statistics, and we don't use any of it. Seriously, we have so much data and just no time to understand it and make actionable activities on it. Actionable activities. Anyway, so we kind of go with gut feel, with player feedback. What do people want? The basic idea is that if you make the game good enough, people want to play it. We didn't want to put in gameplay blockers. A lot of freemium games stop the player. You can't actually play it anymore. There's a timer on it, or you can only play the first bunch and then the rest is blocked out. And we really didn't want to do that. Basically, if you're willing to put in the time commitment, then you can generate, then you can unlock and see all the parts of the game. But at the same time, to counteract that, first of all, arcade games don't make a lot of money per user. It's not like the Farmville social game model where if you get a whale or a real big spender, you can actually make a ton of money per person. But arcade games don't, because of, I think it was mostly because of the demographic who plays this, young people. So we put in a lot of options. Literally, there's about 5 or 6 different revenue models all inside Mega Run. The most obvious one that everyone knows about is in-app purchasing. So you can buy stuff inside the store. Well, what if you don't have money, or if you're a kid, or you don't have a credit card? Well, then we have videos that you can watch. So you can actually choose to watch ads in the game, and that'll reward you with currency that you can then spend in the store. So it costs the player nothing, but they get to watch an ad, and of course the advertisers pay us for that. So that's the second model. We then have, actually there's 3 different video providers we work with, because they can't always provide enough videos for how much users want to watch. Users watch hundreds of thousands of these videos every single day. So we have 3 providers to provide us with enough ads for the amount that the players want to watch. Then we've got Chart Boost, which is basically a way of advertising other games in your own app. So if you see a pop-up in Mega Run for another game, if you click on it or download it, we get a few pennies for that, and then that adds up with enough users. And then in Mega Jump, we also use a company called Keep, which basically gives you rewards. If you clear a stage, if you do something good, get a high score, you get a little pop-up saying, hey, congratulations on your high score. Also, here's a coupon for Best Buy. And if they click on the coupon, they get a coupon for Best Buy. They feel pretty good, and Best Buy gives us, again, a few pennies, but it adds up over the month. So there's a lot of different revenue streams that are constantly changing all the time. Different people are constantly coming out with a new way to make money, and we get a lot of emails about that. Hey, you should try our new revenue model, our new revenue avenue. So there's a lot to think about, and that takes up a fair amount of time now as well.
Hey guys.
Hey.
You guys mentioned how you went through a lot of different iterations in your art process until you finally decided on, I think you mentioned a Super Nintendo idea of really bright and colorful, just grab the player.
Right.
I've got to ask now, when you started off, you said you just had like blobs, little gray bricks. Did you use color at that stage, or did it come halfway through the development cycle, you decided to completely alter your art strategy?
Yeah, the gray blobs were just because they could be made instantly. When we're trying to match meet pixels together and match things up, it helps to work with very simplified artwork, because at that point it's very technical and you're trying to debug things and make sure that things match up, things are working correctly. And if you have a lot of artwork in there with lots of colors, it's actually kind of hard to see what's going on. So part of the reasoning for using such simple sprites at the beginning is just because it's easier to see what's going on, and you can test. You don't want to create tons of nice artwork and like, this isn't working. Technically, we have to build our sprites in a completely different way. You don't want to have to do all the really nice artwork and then throw it out. So it pays to get things working with a very simple art style, or no art style at all. And then once you've got the shape, what shape the sprite is going to be, then you color it in and make it look nice. But we actually have always wanted to use, and same with Mega Jump in our previous games, Plot Tweets and Anarchist, which weren't as successful, they all have a very colorful art style. And that's something we wanted from the very beginning. The company is called Get Set Games, but one of the names we almost got, and we actually have the website for it, is Yay Play. It's really goofy, but we just wanted something like happy and fun and silly, and that's the kind of company we wanted to make, and that's the art style that sort of fits in with that kind of mentality.
You said that the market changed an awful lot between the launch of Mega Jump and Mega Run.
Yeah.
Did you find that the art needed to be changed significantly in those 2 years as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, the UI was a big part of it. The other part of it was moving up to Retina graphics as well, doubling up the resolution on everything. So all of our models, all of our artwork had to be done at double the resolution because the Retina screens on the iPhone are quadruple the pixels and double the width and height. So that, meant we had to really work harder to create really big pieces of art for the background sky and really pay a lot more attention to detail. And again, because it's so crisp and so small, you have to have an art style. We wanted to have an art style that was very easy to read on a small phone, that would look nice on a small phone. So it's not super complicated.
All right, thanks a lot.
But
Hi. I could be wrong, but I think you said that you built Megaman with Coco?
Coco's 2D, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I was wondering, what drove you to that sort of game engine as opposed to something like, say, for example, Unity?
Well, first, thank you for a coding question instead of listen to this guy talk all the time. I was waiting for that. So, I mean, we did look at Unity for, initially. When we were first starting out, money was a big issue. We all had our own jobs and separate jobs, and we didn't have money to spend on it. Although the pricing for Unity it's not crazy, but for when we were starting out, we didn't have the money. So that was a big driver for it as well. And Cocos was open source and already had a pretty established community. At that point, it had pretty well established itself as the best 2D engine on iPhone, at least that we could find. And that was probably in 2009, and I don't know if it was much more than that. The money was really the biggest thing. We were a bit hesitant to go with Cocos in the beginning because me and Derek, who were the developers starting out, didn't know Objective-C. Pretty much everything on iPhone is at the lower level is Objective-C. And we had to spend some time learning that and decide if we wanted to do that. But yeah, I think it proved to be a pretty good decision. Unity has a lot of advantages, I think, for higher content, perhaps 3D-oriented games. But for 2D, Cocos 2D has been, I think it's been a great choice.
Besides Coco, do you have any other sort of game engines and frameworks that you recommend?
Well, we added in near the end of the project, Java added in Box 2D to handle a lot of the collision and some of the physics. Was that right, Java? Was it physics and collision, or just the collision?
I think just collision, actually.
Yeah.
We actually don't use Box 2D for physics, we only use it for collision.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
we also use Cocos Denshin for sound as well.
Yeah, it's part of Cocos 2D, but it does group in some other libraries, yeah, like Cocos Denshin.
Alex?
Yeah.
I was wondering about using Photoshop as a level design tool. First of all, I think that's fantastic that you're able to do that. But I was wondering if you had to do it in passes, as in saving out all your platforms and then saving out all of your collectibles and saving out all of your enemies, or was it all in one go?
We actually put everything all in one file.
Amazing.
So everything in the entire game can be put into a single PSD file.
That's awesome.
And that's how we save it and edit them. Those are also kept on Dropbox, not to be used in the game, but the PSD file. We put all of our files in Dropbox basically for safekeeping, so that we've got, our files are accessible anywhere at any time. Yeah, we set up an exporter that could literally understand every part of the game, put it all in there so we could look at the entire level all in one place and then export that out.
Awesome, thanks.
The important thing as well, actually, if you're thinking about doing this, again, is another great thing Java did. We were originally using a Photoshop script to export the JSON file. And for some of the bigger levels, some of them were a bit longer, they could take 7 or 8 minutes to export one of them. And again, for iteration, that's a nightmare, and it literally stops people from doing it. Like if something stops you from working for 7 or 8 minutes, it doesn't sound long, but if you're doing hundreds of these things, it's brutal. So Java actually rewrote it so that we could actually export using an executable. So we just drag and drop the PSDs onto an executable file, and that would spit out, before we had like 7 or 8 minute exports for a single pattern, now we can export the entire game in about 5 seconds. So if you're thinking about doing that, I recommend not using Photoshop scripting, but Java can answer more questions if you're interested in that.
Thank you.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
So I'm here more as a graphic designer than a game designer, and I've been working professionally for a while now, and I guess my question would be, if I don't have, or if someone doesn't have any game industry experience, what kind of things would like an independent studio look for, or like what kind of stuff could a graphic designer do who hasn't shipped any titles to impress smaller studios? And like networking, like did you guys know each other before the company, or how do you meet developers that can help you out with those stages?
It's a good question. It's a really frustrating industry to try and get into if you're not already in it. But I think almost everyone here probably got into it by the mod community or something like that, by doing things in a non-professional form. As a graphic designer, user interface is probably the part that makes the most sense. Designing user interface is obviously very graphic design intensive, and that's my background. Actually, I got into art through graphic design in a marketing firm, and then got into 3D work by doing work on Valve's Hammer editor and making maps for Counter-Strike, which then actually got picked up. The first map I made actually got put into Counter-Strike, the official map packs, which was pretty crazy. So that was an accident, but it was through modding just for the fun of it and doing things non-professionally and building skills that way. And it's the way all students do it, you know. Even if you're working now, you know, you're still a student of game design, so it pays to actually do stuff non-professionally with other people, other, you know, like-minded people that are maybe coding and don't have a job, but want to make games. You know, they have a need for good design. There's a lot of coders out there that would love to work with a good designer. And if you can do any illustration, then that obviously means you can create game objects. A lot of games don't even have characters. I mean, a lot of puzzle games are just pure graphic design. So I would absolutely recommend finding like-minded people, coders who need artwork, going online, going to the Toronto Game Jam, which is in May, which is a place where you can just bring your skills and people need them and work with people and start developing that. I would do a lot of reference work. Look at all the graphic design work that's in games and look at the styles. You want to be able to produce artwork that people need. That means you need to know what it is. So look at all the games, look at what kinds of things you can do and what your abilities work to, and figure out if you can do that. Can you design those kind of user interfaces? Is it simple stuff like this, or are we talking about much more complex UI that you might find in a AAA title? And can you create that stuff? If you can, then you can start to create a portfolio of fake UI stuff or fake game design stuff, and that's great. I mean, I would rather take someone who has a lot of skill and can produce a lot of stuff that isn't a real game than someone who's got a ship title, but actually his portfolio is a bit crap. Experience is important, but really it's the portfolio that matters and the quality of the artwork that really matters.
Great, thanks.
Keep at it.
Thanks. Question, if I may. Just wondering about from the point of view of business. You guys said the first game did well, and you guys right away started working on the second one. And I wonder, why did you make that decision? Now you kind of get on the high and you want to do something else, but didn't you want to write the first IP a little bit more and kind of work on the first game more? Do you think that was a good decision to jump to the second game right away, or do you think it would be better to spend more time on the first one?
It's actually the opposite of what you say. Although the first image was created a few months, that was definitely based on the high of Mega Jump releasing and doing well, but as you saw, it took us a year and 8 months before we finished the game. So big reason for that is because Rob was doing it on his own for most of the time. We only put the entire company onto this project in December of 2011, so the last 6 months. So the first 12 months, 14 months? Terrible math. The first large chunk of it was all done by Rob with a little bit of help from the artist, but for the vast majority of that time, we were all focused on Mega Jump. So we did spend most of our time working on Mega Jump, the first big title, and supporting it. Like you say, you've got a golden egg, you don't want to ruin it. So we put all of our, 90% of our resources into supporting our hit title, 10% of Rob just kicking his, bashing his head against the wall, getting no help from anyone else. Hey,
What's up?
You're handsome.
Can I have some free save stars, please?
You sure can, Jacob.
All right. Rob, how do you make sure there aren't too many sort of cooks in the kitchen? How do you like sort of properly modularize tasks? I guess if it starts with like a small set of people, your skill sets evolve. When do you decide to bring someone else in, and how do you leverage that?
Really, it was whenever people wanted to join in. You know, as Matt was saying, it was just me for quite a while. For a good chunk of 2011, and then later Nick joined me, and it was kind of just the two of us sitting at my desk and be like tweaking values and like, does the player jump look right? It's like, no, I need like more like floatiness or like camera following, like all those kind of like intangible qualities to make a game. But maybe I could have done a better job of being like, okay, the ship is drowning over here, like I need some help. We did have kind of meetings occasionally where I'd be like, I'd put in like this huge amount of effort and everyone would kind of like crap on it and be like, oh, I spent like a month on that. But that's, you know, ultimately that was kind of just a bit of a bruised ego, but that's just how it goes. You know, there's so much stuff that we tried, even from Mega Jump. I can tell you stories of stuff that we tried. I spent like weeks on, like 2 months on, for a component that we just never used, and it was kind of depressing. But you know, as many people as you can get to work on it is fantastic. But something we didn't really touch on in the presentation, which you kind of hinted on, is for a good chunk of the development, we didn't have a planned schedule for Mega Run, and that was a big issue for getting it out. We were just kind of like, oh yeah, well, you know, when it's done, well, that's when we're going to ship it. But there was no quantification of exactly like what is that? What does that mean? What's the level of quality that we're happy with? And gradually we got better with that over time. It's like adding people, because it was just like, eventually things got to a point, as you could look at for many aspects that we were working on, where it's just like, this is unworkable, like we need to change this, and kind of targeted that problem. So of course, like adding in a schedule was kind of like a big thing, and trying to stick to that. And daily meetings, yeah, we started doing just like daily stand-up meetings, you know, what's everyone working on, like really quick. Stuff like that really helped to kind of keep things progressing forward.
Communication is the biggest part of it. Yeah. If you go for a week or two without talking to everyone else on the team, because your head's in your own ass doing your own work, then things go off and you realize that you aren't doing what you thought everyone else thought you were doing. And so daily meetings are essential for us at the morning to just get a clear idea of what everyone's working on. The second thing was bring on Andy Smith, who's our producer as well, and he really helps coordinate the team. Obviously the dev team does their own coordination, but in terms of you know, setting up tasks and setting up deadlines and timelines for everything, and taking in all the things that need to be dealt with, bugs or gameplay issues or requests, and then helping to decide who gets to do that. That's a big part of the producer role, which is a small company, you don't have a producer, so someone needs to take that role on and wear that hat. And then using scheduling software. So we've gone through a few. We've tried Pivotal Tracker, for example, to track bugs, and we use some scheduling software, and now we're using FogBugs to track all of our tasks and all of our bugs, and that really helps stay on top of shit. Peace.
One last question.
Well, again, one last question here.
All right, awesome. You mentioned a single pixel gap issue that you had with it. What was the cause and how did you fix that?
Well, it was caused from one of the tools that we're using called Texture Packer.
Yeah.
You know that. So there you go.
So I think I know what the issue is.
It was an option in Texture Packer, which was extrude, which was kind of like take the pixel edge around each of the sprites that go into like an atlas, and just push it out by like 1 pixel. And that was like literally it. That like resulted.
Turning it on or off?
Turning it on. Yeah.
Did you have any other weird rendering issues like that?
I'm sure there was some. I can't quite recall.
We haven't had too many problems with rendering issues. We use Texture Packer basically to collect all of our sprites and dump them into a single texture atlas. So instead of us loading in hundreds and hundreds of images, we can instead compile those images into one single sprite sheet, which is then referenced by another file for any of you you guys don't know what texture packer is. And so what would happen that could be really weird and problematic is a mismatch between the image that held all the individual sprites and the text file or that described the positions of all the sprites. So if you're reading in the wrong positions, you could really get some freaky stuff happening, like pretty trippy stuff happening in game where it was reading in all kinds of different wrong parts of the texture sheet into the game, so everything would turn upside down, back to front. Weird stuff happening there.
Thanks.
Sure. All right. Is that it?
So I think that's it, yeah?
Great.
All right, thank you.